Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT ranked meta video. Our analysts are here to go through the 11-11 meta for each stage of the game. We'll be covering each aspect of the meta, including stages, items, and compositions. Keep in mind that there was a B patch, so the meta may still be changing, especially in regards to the number of reroll compositions. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Let's begin by covering the early game, starting with the opening carousel. The meta shifted away from magic damage comps this patch and instead focused a lot more on carries that do physical damage. Riven, Aphelios, Draven, and Nocturne are the best examples of this. Because that prioritization for components has shifted away from things like Tear and Rod, and instead focuses more on swords, gloves, and bow. There's no specific component that's absolutely the best to grab, since you're going to have additional choices later on in the PvE rounds and the 2-2 armory. This means you should go into the game with a game plan around 3 components you're wanting to play for. Which one depends on what you're comfortable playing. Sword is likely the most common since you can use it for several different meta items, including Bloodthirster, Infinity Edge, and Deathblade. All of these items are usable by physical damage carries. Both variations of Guardian Angel can also be used for frontline champions, though the best user of it in the early game, Kennen, was nerfed in the B patch. Lastly, Shojin is viable, but again, keep in mind AP compositions are not doing that well. Glove has fewer viable items, but with the newly reworked Shadow Trap Claw, you have additional options. Again, items like Infinity Edge will be common, as is Last Whisper. Regular Hand of Justice is a rather weak option, but the Shadow variation is alright, especially early in the game. Jeweled Gauntlet is still playable, but you'll be committing early to an AP build, so be wary about making it too early. And then there's Bow, which is most often used for either version of Runins. Runins is quite popular as it's a top tier item for Riven, Yasuo, and Nocturne. It's worth noting that Shadow Runins is not a viable option on Yasuo, so making one early makes you want to avoid Yasuo. Static Shiv is a great opening item with Bow. Despite the nerfs that Hellion received, a high roll early board can still carry you to the mid game. Otherwise, you can use Bow for Last Whisper, Rageblade, or Titans. The other components are all viable in some ways. Belt and Chain Vest, for example, build into fantastic defensive items that you can slam early. Items like Warmog, Shadow Locket, and Shadow Stoneplate. Focus necessary for Runins and Bloodthirster, though having multiple cloaks is usually a detriment. Even though AP compositions aren't doing that well, you can still play them. Tear is a must-have in that case, so if that's a game plan you're willing to commit to early, you can grab either a Tear or a Rod, with Tear being the higher priority. Of course, Tear also builds in the Shiv and Redemption, so you're not investing too much by having it. Overall, go into each game with an idea of what you're comfortable playing, whether that's opening with defensive items, playing for physical carry items, or leaning into AP builds. Let's now move on to Stage 1. The most impactful aspect of Stage 1 is sadly out of the player's control. There's a lot of variance in what each player gets from the loot orbs. For example, it's common to, on average, get around 5 to 6 gold. But with champions introduced in 11-11, the gold is more likely to be champions. Which champions you get, if any, will determine how well your early game goes. Most of the 3 costs are worth using, with a few of the better ones being Riven, Yasuo, and Nunu. 2 costs are less impactful, but can still help you win early rounds, and getting 1 cost is the worst outcome. And receiving gold coins instead of any champions likely puts you in the weakest position of all of those openings, since you're just stuck with what the shop gives you. There's other possible openings such as low gold and Nico's help, but those generally are considered low rolls and should happen less frequently. But given the amount of variation in what the orbs drop you, it's difficult to say what the best way to go is in the early game, since so much of it is luck dependent. That said, the best thing you can do as a player to mitigate the variance is buying pairs and playing strong synergies, which we'll cover next in Stage 2. First off, we're going to recommend not playing for a loss streak once Stage 2 begins. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but the best way to play the early game is to try to win rounds to preserve health and build up a stronger economy. Aim to play your strongest board when possible to reach that goal. And as for how to do that, there's a lot of openings you can go for that are strong. Of course, luck does play a role, as players that receive 3 cost champions from their PvE orbs are likely going to have an advantage over the lobby. The 2 main ways to play around are playing 2-star champions with good synergies and slamming early items when possible. Strong opening boards include Hellions, Brawlers, Legionnaire, and Dawnbringer. Hellions are a bit weaker, but hitting Ziggs 2 with Static Shiv is still likely to win you rounds in Stage 2. Due to Lulu and Kennen nerfs, you may not want to commit to Hellions past stage 2, but having 5 of them early is still viable. Brawlers are by far the best frontline you can have in the early game, especially if you receive Nunu from an early loot orb. Nunu also opens the door to early Abomination. Abomination during stages 2, 3, and 4 is one of the most common ways to do well in the current meta, and most lobbies will have 3 or 4 players playing it. The reason is that Nunu is a great frontliner, and the monstrosity dishes out a lot of damage if you have physical carry items on it, like Infinity Edge and Runins. Due to that, it's easy to pivot into other compositions later on. Abomination is also one of the few ways you can run AP builds later in the game. Legionnaire has several openings, such as Callista with Aatrox, or hitting Riven and Yasuo from a loot orb. Riven plays into Dawnbringer as well, since you have an easy time hitting for Dawnbringer alongside Gragas and Kha'Zix. Yasuo makes Nightbringer a fantastic opening as well. All in all, there's plenty of options to play a strong opening board. Be sure to level around 2-2 or 2-1 if you got the gold to do so, and it will help you win the round. After that, you can either pre-level at the end of 2-3 if you can't make 10 gold, or just level to 5 after the carousel on 2-5. As for items, try to wait to make items until you see what you get from the 2-2 armory. Since you're guaranteed a shadow component, you should have a lot of options. From there, you can slam 2 items if you have the components for it, but at least make 1. Not making any items is considered greedy, and likely will lose rounds because of it. With stage 2 done, let's move into the mid-game and talk about stage 3. Stage 3 is where you want to level to 6 around 3-2. With Skirmishers and Forgotten being less of a threat, you can generally skip through stage 3. That said, if you're losing a lot of health, especially if you came off of Krugs with a 5 loss streak, you will want to roll. Roll until you hit several 2-star champions and have a usable item holder. Most players are unlikely to need to roll during this stage of the game. Level 6 is also where Assassins and Cavalier Spellweavers come into play. Assassin players commonly roll on 6 to 2-star their LeBlanc and to get 4 Assassins. Cavalier players will stay at level 6 and slow roll to try to hit Hecarim 3, Brand 3, Victor 3, and Sejuani 3. It's a risk to play now after the B patch since there's fewer players re-rolling, but it is still viable. There's not much else to talk about for stage 3, just continue playing your strongest board. Let's move on to stage 4 next. This is where the game gets really spicy as the meta has shifted back towards players rolling at 7. Of course, that's not mandatory because playing for a fast 8 is viable, especially off the strong board openings. For the majority of players, once they hit level 7 on 4-1, they will likely need to roll. There's plenty of options for what to play at level 7, but the main goal is to play a carry that fits your items. Lots of auto-attack focus items means you want champions like Riven, Draven, or Aphelios. Defensive items point more towards AP compositions using Vel'Koz or Karma. Mordekaiser also does well with defensive items. It's all dependent upon what items you made earlier and what components you have available. Along with your carry, fit in a few synergies that go well with them and make sure you've got a solid front line. In addition to that, a lot of utility champions are useful in this stage, such as Ryze. Ryze in particular is going to help a lot against assassin players in the lobby. As for Fast 8, try to do so if you're hitting level 7 with 50 gold left over and have more than 60 health. This will give you enough time to level to 8 sometime between 4-3 and 4-5. After leveling, the goal is the same as rolling on 7, except you can also look for 5-cost champions. Before we move on, let's talk about some mid-game compositions. We've mentioned a couple compositions, but in general, once you hit level 7, you've got quite a few options. Legionnaires in particular have a lot of viable carries such as Riven, Yasuo, and Draven. Plus, Mordekaiser with good items can carry you through most of stage 4. Both Riven and Yasuo need to be 3-starred if you want to commit to them as the carry, so stay on level 7 and re-roll for them. Riven does well with Dawnbringer, while Yasuo leans more into Nightbringer than he does Legionnaire. Draven is a catch-all carry that you can always pivot into if you're not hitting Riven or Yasuo. Assassins are also current favorites of the meta, with Nocturne being the most common carry. Both Katarina and LeBlanc are playable as the main carry, but Nocturne is far more consistent. Look to reroll for Nocturne 3 at level 7 with 6 Assassin and 2 Revenant. Katarina and LeBlanc both use Coven with 4 Assassins if you play them. We already mentioned Cavalier Spellweaver, but another AP composition is Abomination Spellweaver, which uses Vel'Koz as the carry. It's viable, but will struggle against Assassins. Karma is hard to play effectively in the current meta, but going fast 8 and hitting 5 costs like Garen and Volibear will help out a lot. Otherwise, the more common way to run Invoker is with Teemo as the carry. Lastly, there's Aphelios, which can be played with either 4 Ranger or 6 Nightbringer. The key to playing Aphelios, besides the best in slot items, is having Darius. The areas will help Aphelios scale into the late game, so try to level to 8 quickly if you're playing an Aphelios comp. All in all, there's a lot of viable options in the meta. Just play what the game gives you as long as it works with your items and components. Next up is the late game. This encompasses stage 5, 6, and 7, though most games tend to end around stage 6. For any players that aren't slow rolling or went fast 8, the goal should be to level to 8 sometime after Raptors, preferably on 5-1. Once level 8, you want to solidify your current board by 2-starring everything you can and using the rest of your components. Try to have at least 3 items on your carry with 1 or 2 items given to your front line. The rest can be given to a secondary carry or utility items like Shroud or Zephyr. In general, level 8 is where most players will end the game at. Level 9 is playable but rarely worth it unless you're in a strong position already in the game. Without the economy and health to do so, leveling to 9 is just far too costly. Instead, focus on your level 8 board and look to add 5-cost champions that fit into your comp. More importantly for the late game is scouting and positioning. Always scout every round and try to keep track of who you've played against recently. The best way to position is very lobby dependent, but try to keep moving your units each round as it makes it harder for players to scout you. Avoid obvious threats like Shroud, Zephyr, or having your carry be easily CC'd by units like Volibear or Thresh. Being diligent is important for scouting assassin players, as positioning poorly against them is an easy way to lose 15 or more health in a round. We recommend watching streams of high-ranked players to get an idea of how they position in the late game. Besides learning positioning, the other way to consistently place better is by working on having better early and mid games. Improve those aspects and you'll definitely climb the ladder. That's going to be it for today's video, folks. The B patch has helped even out the meta, as rerolling is no longer the dominant way to play the game. But the playstyle is still viable, as are plenty of others, so the meta is in a diverse spot currently. Let us know in the comments section below what you're looking forward to playing in patch 11.12. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.